Have you recently looked at Ohio State's 2023 recruiting class and wondered what quarterback is going to join this group? Well, John Garcia Jr. is here to help us learn about the players that might join the 2023 Ohio State recruiting class. John Garcia Jr., Director of Football Recruiting for Sports Illustrated, is amazing. And him and I had a great conversation about these young men. You can hear it only right here on Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, April 27th in the year 2022, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. That is correct. John Garcia Jr. of Sports Illustrated is back to go over some quarterbacks, 4 to be specific, that might join the Ohio State 2023 recruiting class. Not all 4 will join, but these 4 are possibilities to join this group. Sit back, relax, enjoy this fun conversation with myself and John Garcia Jr. about guys that are really talented that I think you will love to see play in the shoe. And joining us now here on Locked On Buckeyes, it is John Garcia Jr. Once again, he is the Director of Football Recruiting for Sports Illustrated. John, welcome back.
Good to be back on with you, Jay. A lot going on in Buckeye land as always, it seems like.
Yeah, it's never slowing down. We could even talk about the transfer portal, talk about how big that has been for Ohio State football and even basketball as well. But today's all about the quarterbacks, 2023 quarterbacks, little dabble, little 2024 recruit as well towards the end of the show. But we got 3 guys here that I see are on Ohio State's board that they're interested in. Dante Moore, a 5-star recruit, Eli Holstein, and then Dylan Lonergan. Let's start with Dylan. I do think he's probably the most likely at this point in time to try to be an Ohio State Buckeye in the future. What do you see when you look at this kid, 6'2", 215, has some decent size to be a high school quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, not only a high school quarterback, but a great baseball prospect. I mean, he's pitching in the 90s already. So there's a lot of talk about the baseball front with Dylan, but he's a great quarterback on the front end of that. And that's why he's got quite the unique recruitment relative to the other guys that we're talking about. And I think he's got the most tangible plan going forward, which is important in tracking the craziness that is quarterback recruiting. So he just dropped his top 5 on Friday. Ohio State, of course, right in there. Some other notable schools in there. Stanford, South Carolina, which he just visited, is in there. Alabama, Florida as well. 2 other schools that he spent time at recently. But really, Ohio State has some momentum in this recruitment. They've really spread a wide net in the class of 23. Lonergan is more of a recent target, but obviously that communication has been positive, yet early and steady, with the Buckeyes making his top 5. And I was messaging with him a little bit last week, and I said, look, you haven't taken any official visits, so should we assume that this top 5 that you dropped is probably where you're going to take official visits before a decision? And he said, yeah, I mean, that's probably what I'm going to do. So it means he's going to get up to Columbus, get those 48 hours on campus on the school's dime, which is, of course, totally different visits than unofficial visits. So we know Lonergan likes the Buckeyes. He's going to take the official. He's going to get the whole pitch from both staffs, football and baseball, because that's really an important part of his recruitment. He has said he is 100% playing baseball at the next level. Of course, there's a chance he gets drafted out of high school, and that could throw a wrinkle into all of this, especially depending on where he's drafted, all of those things. You know, I don't know a ton about baseball recruiting, but he's a pitcher who throws 90-plus from the South, and he's a top 100 recruit on Perfect Game. You know, they have a rating scale 1 to 10. He's a 10. So whatever that means, he's really, really good. So I think that's going to factor into football at some point. So the question is, does he say no thanks to football now, or does he do so 4 years from now? And if that's the case, then all these schools are still going to come after him. So he is quite unique both on and off the field, but Ohio State is absolutely in it.
John, I have a love for quarterbacks that play baseball because it seems like all the quarterbacks that pitch or play shortstop or second base, whatever it is, they have the better arms. And I know that we go to the NFL and Kyler Murray and I want to say Russell Wilson played baseball as well. All these guys, that Tom Brady being one of the guys, I think he got drafted as stuff pops into my head. Their arms seem to be different. And I don't know all the mechanics between baseball and football, how they can connect with each other. And I know it's a little bit of different arm motion. I don't know all that kind of stuff, but all I know is there's some connection between baseball and quarterbacking. And these guys I love because they really excel on the football field as well as on the baseball diamond. I think it'll be a huge plus. Ohio State's baseball team is not that good. So if baseball is the number one thing, then that may be a deciding factor as far as why he may not go to Ohio State. But he could be somebody that says, well, I want to help build this baseball program and be coached by Ryan Day and Corey Dennis. That could be a combination where Dylan says, hey, let's go to Columbus. They have everything I want in football. I can help build a baseball team and move forward and play both sports at the next level.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue against the football element of Ohio State, really at any position, but you get into like quarterback, wide receiver, pass rusher, and in Ohio State DB, Ohio State has so much history and recent history to sell to recruits from a developmental standpoint. So certainly I would understand how that could appeal. And look, that's really the only program that he hasn't spent a lot of time at that's still in it, and I think that says a lot too about the surface level of that OSU pitch. So obviously, once he takes the official and has a better understanding, we'll get a little bit better feel for where OSU really is on this thing. But yeah, I think he loves football, or I know he loves football as well. So he's got multiple layers of the decision-making process to deal with that other kids don't have to. And as you mentioned, quarterbacks that play baseball, it's just a different understanding. Obviously, the arm strength is going to be there, especially if you're a pitcher like Dylan is. I mean, it's really predicated on the fastball setting the tone. But I think an underrated element of baseball players playing football, most people go to the Patrick Mahomes arm angle thing, and that's cool and fun and great to watch on highlights. But really, for me, it's the timing, how quickly the football or baseball is released, particularly for pitchers. You want to shrink that window for the batter. And so it creates a quicker release, and those mechanics can trigger that much faster. So obviously there's benefits to that on the football field as well, relative to the pass rush, timing of routes and things like that. So it's usually the quicker, the better. Some of the best quarterbacks have the quickest motions. And I think that helps Dylan stand out relative to some others in this really strong quarterback class.
We are here on Locked on Buckeyes with John Garcia Jr. from Sports Illustrated. Let's go right on to the next guy. Let's go Dante next. 6'2", 195-pound quarterback from Martin Luther King High School in Detroit, Michigan. This is someone that Buckeye fans, if you look on Dante Moore and you start reading things about him, you might get a little bad taste in your mouth, because I did read that the two Michigan schools, Michigan and Michigan State, are high on him, and also Notre Dame. So if you're wanting to rub it in your face and make your Michigan friends mad, just say, hey, Ohio State snagged the guy that you guys really wanted because we have the better quarterback factory right now. But Dante Moore, he's talented, a five-star kid. Interesting thing about him is he's been starting since he's been a freshman. And that's rare. I know I see it in basketball every now and then. I'll watch a lot of high school basketball games. But in football, especially at the quarterback position, John, we rarely see that.
Yeah, even from the elite guys. I mean, I can rattle off so many that had to wait a year, 2, 3, or even 4 to see the field in high school. A couple of 4-year starters that come to mind: Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, right off the top of my head. But it's really not a huge list. We're usually working with a much smaller sample. And a lot of times now, younger guys are splitting reps with maybe some older players. Of course, Arch Manning is going to be a 4-year starter for this upcoming cycle. But so is Dante Moore, as you mentioned. So obviously a ton of experience, a ton of reps. He's won a state title. He can play in cold weather. All these things that factor into the kind of quintessential Midwest quarterback. And I think 6 months ago, Jay, this is really where we thought his recruitment was going to be locked into, almost a Midwest bubble of the schools you mentioned: Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State was certainly in there. initially before they picked up a quarterback in Marcus Stokes here in the last few weeks. So we thought this was a locked in kind of narrow recruitment. Midwestern kid is going to end up in the Midwest. And he admitted to me that was initially probably what he was going to do. But once the coaching carousel changed this past fall, I think Dante Moore's mind opened up. He started to continue to add more scholarship offers. And then Brian Kelly's move down to LSU, I think really was when he said, hold on, I got to take a step back with this whole thing. And certainly LSU's been in it. He's already visited multiple times. He just visited for an official. So we talked about the benefits of that. He just took his official to LSU with Carnell Tate, another Midwesterner who Ohio State fans know very, very well. So LSU's in it. He's been to Miami multiple times. He's going out to Oregon a couple of times. So, Dante is certainly well-traveled. He's probably the most well-traveled quarterback in this class, including Arch Manning, including all these other guys. So I think that creates more of a timeline, an extended version of the timeline. So I think it's not just the Midwestern schools anymore. And the more that time goes on, you wonder who's going to pop back in his recruitment. But he did check out a spring practice in Columbus, obviously understands the development that has been shown there under Ryan Day. He understands the emergence of CJ Stroud and where he would potentially fit in beginning next season, or next year, I should say, 2023. So he understands what that pitch is. Obviously, there's going to be a vacancy because nobody expects CJ to be the Buckeye quarterback next fall or 2 falls from now. So I think that's something that is very appealing to Dante Moore, because if you look at some of the schools that he's looking at, that's a similar thread. Like, he wants to be the guy year one in college, just like he was in high school, right? I mean, that's something he's already kind of been there and done that with. So I do think that's appealing from the Ohio State angle. But as I mentioned, there's so many schools in this mix. He visited Auburn, Florida, Florida State. Like, he ended up seeing 15 schools already this year. So I think it really dilutes the individual messages, and it makes you focus, like we just talked about with Dylan, it makes you focus on the official visits. So he just took one to LSU. All the other ones are seemingly up in the air. I think he'll continue taking them in June. So if you're a Buckeye fan, it's real simple. Do you get an official out of him, or do you not get an official out of him? I think if the answer is yes, you're still in the fight, and you got a puncher's chance. If not, I think it's probably time to focus more on Lonergan, maybe Eli Holstein, or maybe Dylan Raiola, who I know we'll talk about later. But it's interesting because this Ohio State quarterback room is very deep, even beyond Stroud. There's a lot of talent. I mean, there's a reason that, I don't want to say guys were run off, but guys moved on. When they kind of looked around with Kyle McCord and some of these other guys that are still there. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out going into the fall, particularly if CJ has the kind of year we all think he will and heads to the NFL draft. I think that battle is going to be nationally tracked. And if you throw in a Dante Moore into that, I think it could be even that much more interesting. So I think that's something to keep a close eye on. But with Dante, track the visits. If he starts setting officials and Ohio State gets one, it's game on.
Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being not going to happen or least likely to happen, 10 being it probably will happen. What kind of scale would you put the likelihood of him getting in Ohio State and going to Ohio State on an official visit?
I'm probably in the 5 range. Well, he's already taken 1, so there's 4 left. I think Miami's going to get 1. I think Oregon's going to get 1. So that knocks out, half of the remaining trips. And I'm not sure where he goes after that. I mean, the thing about the Midwestern schools, Jay, is that he's been there so many times, because when you start as a true freshman at a school like King in Detroit and you start winning, you have offers and experiences early on. So he's been to Ohio State a good bit. He's been to Michigan State, certainly Notre Dame, plenty. So you never know how much is needed for those official visits at that same token. So I think he's going to use the majority of the trips outside of the Midwestern region, as we just talked about. But you would imagine 1 or 2 of these Midwest schools are going to get those remaining trips. And I think Notre Dame's probably the most likely of those, given the buzz the Irish has had with him for quite some time. So that could just leave 1 visit in the end between Michigan State, and Ohio State, let's say. And that's hard, right? He's a Michigan kid. Both of those schools are all in on him. You wonder if that becomes a big factor late in the game. But that tells you how important of a recruit Dante is, that everyone's campaigning at this point, even just to get him on campus one more time before he lines up to make a decision. So I'd put it right at 4 or 5 range. I think it's possible. I'm not sure how likely, because I just don't think he needs to see a lot of the Midwest schools again.
John, there's another kid here, 2023 prospect that we have not touched on just yet. Eli Holstein, you've mentioned him a few times. 4-star kid, recruit, 6'3", 226. I'm a person. I don't follow the recruiting as much as you do, but if you give me 6'3", 226, and he has the tools that the high school quarterback has, I like that 226. I can build on that, kill some of that baby fat, tight, lean things out, get more muscle built on him. I love that coming in already. But this kid's another one that not really sure if he's going to be an Ohio State commit coming up really anytime this year.
Yeah, Eli's on a different timeline than all these guys, because he's already made one commitment. He committed to Texas A&M early in the cycle, and he decommitted probably about a month ago at this point. So he's really taken a step back, and he's going to resume taking visits and see who's interested on his second recruitment, basically. So Alabama has been the school that he's been to the most. I think 3 visits already this spring, including one right before he decommitted from A&M. So I think most of us feel like the ball is in Alabama's court, but of course, Alabama's in it for Arch Manning. They may be the front runner from Arch Manning, from what I have been told in the last week or so. So if you're a Buckeye fan who wants Eli Holstein, who, by the way, is probably the most athletic of all these quarterbacks that we're talking about, if you're in the Eli Holstein camp for 23 at OSU, keep an eye on Arch Manning. It could be that simple, because I'm not sure if Nick Saban will take any quarterback before Arch is ready to make his decision. And that's no knock on Holstein. They're totally different skill set wise, but Bama's been tracking Arch for 4 years, and with Holstein, it's been more like a year and a half. So just naturally, there's been more interest in Arch over a longer period of time. So I do think that factors in with Holstein. But Ohio State, Florida, LSU, A&M, all these schools are keeping tabs on him and inquiring about potentially bringing him in.
John, it was a couple years ago now. I was on vacation, I think 2020. I took some time away. Literally I was like, I need to get away from here. I can't go nowhere. Quarantine time period. So I was like, I need to go away. So I went in, I think I was in Kentucky, went hiking for a little bit. And I got my computer out. I was like, let me look at this Arch Manning kid. Like, I know about Cooper, know about Peyton and Eli and Archie. I had not heard I heard of Arch. Didn't know how good Arch was at such a young age. And so I'm sitting here watching him, and I'm at the kitchen table in this hotel. I'm like, wait, this is Arch Manning? This is Cooper's son? I had heard all the stuff about how good Cooper was in high school before his career was abruptly ended due to an injury. But I had no idea his son was this good. And it makes a lot of sense for Nick Saban to wait until Arch makes a decision before taking up another quarterback. I myself would have loved for Ryan Day to be in that Arch Manning sweepstakes. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen, which it would have been crazy if Ryan Day could swoop in, take Arch Manning away from everybody down there in the South. Dude, I'll go crazy. I love the JT Tuimoloau commit last year. I'll love this one even more because Arch Manning is that good. But that could be a blessing for Ohio State if Eli Holstein does not go to Alabama because Arch goes there. Well, hey, where else can he go? Where else do you want to go if you want to be a quarterback that wants to be developed at a factory, a football factory, possibility of winning a national championship and being a first-round pick? I mean, you can go to Alabama, but you can also go to Ohio State.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And Holstein has long been ready to leave home. He's a Louisiana kid, just like Arch, by the way, which is ironic. Those two, fairly or not, are going to be compared pretty much for the rest of their careers. I think that state has become a sneaky quarterback factory, and this class has like 4 or 5 Power 5 quarterbacks in that state. But anyway, it's really Holstein and Arch atop that list. And yeah, he was committed to A&M, obviously. Like I said, he's looking at Bama, Ohio State, Florida, maybe even going back to A&M. That's certainly in the realm of possibility. But my point is, he's all been set to leave Louisiana. He's not tied to even just the SEC footprint in that regard. So I do think he's going to continue to take visits. And I do think his timeline, fair or not, is tied to Arch. I'm just not sure if Saban will pull the trigger on taking another quarterback before Arch is ready to make a decision. I think they've invested too many years of recruiting. Nick has personally been recruiting Arch. He doesn't recruit a lot of kids one-on-one. So I think all of those factors are very important for every other quarterback, not just Eli Holstein, because I think when you look at Arch, it's Bama, Georgia, Texas, Virginia. Clemson was in it at one point. Ole Miss at one point as well. The schools that have elected to move on from him or understood they weren't going to get him have since taken commitments, right? Ole Miss got one yesterday. Tennessee's got one. So the two schools his uncles played at, they're already off the board. And Clemson has also recently gotten a verbal quarterback commitment. So I do think that everyone's got eyes on Arch for a reason, but it affects more than just the schools he's looking at. And Ohio State is a great example of that. I think they're in it for Holstein and for Lonergan. Bama made his top 5 as well. So again, Arch has dominoes that go well beyond, the schools he's looking at, and Ohio State with 2 of these 3 is really going to factor in. And, it's something to keep an eye on. And even with Dante Moore, LSU's certainly going to keep swinging for Arch Manning to try to keep him within state lines. Obviously, Baton Rouge is the closest city to New Orleans of all these that we're talking about for Arch. But even LSU kind of understands that, hey, we got to keep looking for other guys. So they've, taken their shot at Holstein. They just hosted Dante Moore. So a lot of these big brand name schools in the South are factoring into Ohio State's quarterback recruiting, which is another good example of how national a brand this is.
John, last week after we recorded that show, you talked about a kid in the 2024 class that might reclassify to join the 2023 class. We talked about 3 quarterbacks that are already 2023 recruits that Ohio State has their eyes on. Not really sure if they're going to be able to land them. But who is this other kid? What can you tell us about him and the likelihood of possibly reclassifying?
Well, it's really hard. And look, Ohio State fans know how abrupt it can be. Quinn Ewers just did this, right? So
yeah,
this is something that materializes later, more towards the summer and even the fall. So it's still a little early to, I guess, throw this out there. But we have heard rumblings that Dylan Raiola, who could be the number 1 quarterback for the 24 cycle, could be thinking about reclassifying to 2023. So I think that could be a really interesting domino, because we've been talking about it all day. This 23 class is loaded at quarterback. And if he's the cream of the crop in 24, he would basically, have his pick nationally of schools to potentially attend. If he does reclassify, given the timing, it could shrink that pool. But Raiola has been a national recruit for about a year now. He is also well-traveled. He's a Nebraska legacy who was there recently. He followed that with a trip to Ohio State, which has already been a return trip to Columbus. He's very familiar with the Buckeye program. I think today, if he were to stay in 24, stay the course and make a commitment, I think Ohio State could be the favorite. But if he reclassifies, I'm not sure how that goes, right? How many schools would still be involved if he's all of a sudden shifting up one entire class? I think that makes things really interesting for Dylan Raiola, but an unbelievable talent out of Arizona, more of a pro style guy, unbelievable arm. I mean, all these kids have great arms. Raiola's is arguably the best of the bunch we're talking about relative to football. I mean, I think Lonergan's power and his ceiling may be higher, but Raiola's pro ready right now from an arm standpoint. And that's what has so many schools already beginning to turn the page to 24 to really court him and spend that time and investment into that recruitment. And Ohio State has done a good a job as any school in the Raiola recruitment. So I think that makes things so interesting, because we talked about the talent that is in the quarterback room, even beyond CJ Stroud, when it comes to looking at the class or the year of 2023. So now if you throw in a reclassification, it could throw another wrinkle into it, just like last year when Quinn Ewers all of a sudden reclassified and then he was like immediately on campus. I don't think it'll be that abrupt with Raiola. We're talking about it in April. We were not talking about this with Quinn last April. It was more about him getting healthy and hitting, the camp circuit and all of that. So these things do change relatively quickly, but from an academic standpoint, obviously he's got to push things forward. So he's got to take some summer classes and overload himself in the fall if he wants to get in for the class of 23. So that's a lot to ask of a kid. It's been done. It's not very common. JT Daniels did it. Quinn Ewers. Those are the two most recent examples. So we'll see. We'll see if those rumors are true. But I think even if he wants to do it, there's a lot of logistics that have to be sorted out to even have a shot at doing it. So it's a little early to finalize anything on that front, even if you're Dominic Raiola himself.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I know we're almost out of time, but I believe Sonny Styles just reclassified too.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
not same different position, defensive player, but still reclassification. And I think he announced his towards the end of the football season in the fall. He also said he's going to stay and do a spring semester in high school because he played basketball. So
Right.
different situations, but this reclassification stuff it's weird. Like I'm 33. I'm not used to this at all. So I know it's tricky for you when you're covering it and following it. I'm just like, just stay in school, kid. Like, make your memories. They're like, no, when I go to college. So this different time period we're living in. John, we're out of time, man. It's always fun having you on. I look to have you on in the future to talk more recruiting, maybe some transfer portal stuff, depending on Buckeye bring transfers in and things like that. If you could let everyone know where they can catch you on Twitter and maybe follow some things you're doing over at SI.
Well, Jay, you've taken care of Twitter for me. It's right there on the screen, John Garcia _JR. And yeah, nationally, we're covering recruiting every day at Sports Illustrated, just si.com/college.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jsteven07. It's always fun having John on, and he's going to be a staple. He's going to be a fixture here on the podcast, maybe weekly, maybe every other week, depending on what's going on. But I love what he does. I love what he brings, different flavor, different insight, because your boy's not the best at recruiting. So John, you help me where I am where I am weaker in the podcasting space. Thank you so much for coming back on, John. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Jay. Take care.